What we did when we started off in January 2011 is the first thing we tackled was an API platform. And so we launched developer.pearson.com, which is taking Pearson's content, turning it into a format that any developer could use, called an API. And so you could have people creating new amazing innovations, mashing up two types of Pearson's content, things that we never would have thought was possible. And this enabled the developers to reach nooks and crannies that we didn't actually know existed. We connected with these developers through attending a lot of hackathons and meetups and going out and speaking with them. And they were really impressed to know that Pearson was approaching their content in a way that allowed anyone to collaborate and use it in a way that they saw fit. And that was the start of changing the way that people perceived Pearson, showing that we were open to collaboration, showing that we understood what was happening in the digital world around us, and that we weren't always going to have the best ideas, that other people were going to be able to come up with things that were even better and more intuitive than what we thought of.
May I ask, were you one of the first of the big publishers to do that kind of thing? I mean,
according to what I've been told and the research we did, Pearson was the first publisher to have an API, to have a developer platform where we consistently and continually put out content for people to use.
When you say content, what kinds of content is the most, has been innovated on, or where developers have jumped on?
We've got a number of different APIs. We've got the Penguin Classics. We have kitchen recipe textbooks. We have the Longman Dictionary. We have travel guides from Dorian Kingsley. So content in business sectors as well. So depending on your interest, chances are we've got some content that could be used for you.
And once the developers play with it and they produce new mashups, as you say, what happens to that content? Whose is it, firstly?
Yeah.
And does he use it to market Pearson, or do the developers have any kind of intellectual property over that? How does that work?
So the content that we make available, it doesn't have any rights or royalties that go back to Pearson per se, beyond the usage, and the usage is in a technical frame. So if you do X number of calls, if you access the content a certain amount of times, then you end up moving up a tier. And that first tier is free, and once you hit a certain amount of usage, then you could hit a paid tier. So it's not being paid for the content, it's being paid just like an application developer for the amount of usage that you get. What you develop is yours, how it's used is yours. We do have terms and conditions around, how you could mash it up with certain types of content. We'll try to stay away from competitors, but most likely those are things you're already familiar with, just being a developer in the space. And so it's pretty much free will for the people to be able to use it as they see fit, and then to earn the revenue that they want to on top of that.
Okay. Can you tell me a bit more about creating a startup culture in this company of 50,000 employees, if you could mention that as well?
So one of the first things, after we got the API platform up and running, I formed the Future Technologies team, that other aspect of my job. And we realized that there are about 12, 13 of us, that we couldn't reach all 50,000. And so we had to figure out a way to actually connect all the different parts of Pearson so that we could find out what was going on, so we could raise up innovation, so we could get everybody to collaborate and connect without recreating the wheel. Because if everybody's doing the same thing and not talking, then that's going to slow the business down. Where if we can cut out the duplication and share best practices, then people can move ahead quite quickly. So what we did is we created a network of people that we call the champions. And there's two ways that you could identify or be recommended for the champions. You could have your boss say, you're a digital thought leader, you're someone who's actually representing and charting the way for Pearson to go forward in the new innovation realm. You also could be someone who we hear of through word of mouth, and that may be through our intranet, or it may be just through a recommendation. And what we did is we connected those digital thought leaders and formed this Champions Network. There's about 150 people in the Champions. It's a global group, and they work with us on everything we do. They'll get together twice a year, and they'll pitch ideas to each other, and then we build those top ideas. They'll also be part of our monthly calls. They'll also be the group that collaborates with us on our activities day to day.
And is that parallel to whatever their primary role might be?
Yep.
And how many of them did you say there were?
150 people in the champions. And so it is something that they do because they believe it's important for the future of Pearson to be able to look ahead, to see things 6 to 12 months out that aren't necessarily guaranteed, but could influence the future direction of their products. And so they'll take time out of their day jobs to actually work with us, to explore that future. And then they'll take that knowledge back to their business, to their product teams, to be able to help them chart a more logical, more successful path because they've already seen a glimpse of the future.
Can you give me some examples of where this startup culture is kind of yielding fruit in Pearson so far? I know it's early stage, but...
So for us, I mean, we've built, with the champions, we've built, I think we're up to 21 prototypes. And so we've shown that you could do rapid development, and we do that in a way that it's 3 months. So everything we do is starting off by a month of pretty much research, then a month of design and a month of development. It isn't chunked up that way, it interfuses across. But by doing that, we've shown the business that you don't need a long life cycle to actually introduce a product. You can do so very, very rapidly. So a number of parts of the company have now changed their development path to be much more rapid, that they'll do things in a shorter life cycle. They'll do things in a 3-month or 6-month time period to introduce this MVP, this minimum viable product, instead of waiting for a big bang. And that's what we've infused into the business.
How do you get buy-in on that? How do you have to educate? Do you leave a copy of the Lean Startup on everybody's desk and just
Some
say...
people have done that. It's actually, I mean, the champions, I think we're lucky to have found the champions and to form that network, because this is something that the things that we're talking about aren't necessarily new, but they're a new application to a traditional type of business, and that's been kind of the dynamics. And so it's been exciting to bring the startup culture, the startup mindset into Pearson. And the people that we're working with already were tracking startups and we're already thinking about ways to do things differently. We gave them essentially the fuel to be able to say, look, there's this group that's charting the future of Pearson, this is what they recommend, and thus to give them a little bit more credibility than they may have had if they were trying to stand up on their own and saying, we need to change the way that we develop applications or products. So we've given them that extra stamp of credibility.
You mentioned earlier looking outside the company.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And does that involve, cultivating startups in parallel with you? And can you tell me a bit more about that?
So the first year when we were up and running as a team, we spent a lot of time getting the foundation in place and developing the champions, getting the champions network underway. And once we did that, then we started to incorporate, contacts and things along those lines from the outside. And so we immediately sponsored incubators and co-working spaces. So we sponsored General Assembly in New York and London. We sponsor 1776 in Washington, D.C. We sponsor Rocket Space in San Francisco. And so in those spaces, we sit alongside startups. We do panels with startups and with the edtech community, letting them know about Pearson, leading conversations around the future of monetization, the future of education. And so we immediately became a part of the community. And so again, shifting from that perception of a big company being kind of big and terrifying and how do you actually approach them, we just went out and mingled with everybody. And that was really, really exciting. It was fun. And again, like our API program, it changed a lot of the way people perceive Pearson. And so we've done iterations on that subsequently. And one of the ones that was most recent was the Pearson Catalyst for Education program. And that's the accelerator we launched in February. It takes challenges from inside Pearson and opens them up to startups to be able to pitch solutions. And the startups had to be under 3 years old. They had to have a product that we could see and test and try out. And they had to be enthusiastic about working with Pearson. And so we had 5 challenges, and we've matched those up with 5 startups, and they're working through their pilots now to actually produce these solutions that will address the challenges that the Pearson teams put forward. And it's been really exciting. I mean, the startups have got, open access to Pearson, so they've had mentoring along the way. They've been amazing at networking and creating new connections. And the people within Pearson have seen how the startups will, incorporate new technologies with the way that they'll work in a much more rapid way, the way that they'll essentially trash something that they've done and start afresh to get the right result at the right time. And so it's given a lot of people a new way of thinking.
that the freedom to fail fast, fail often, all of that is a bit of it's great that you can create the space. I think a lot of these legacy companies don't really have they don't have the flexibility to be able to do that.
Right.
So it's interesting that you're doing that. And then finally, you mentioned also, there was this issue of diversity in innovation, and especially with respect to new markets, and obviously how does that translate into Pearson's in the context of Pearson? Whether you're looking at the big growth story of, for example, the African emerging markets. How are you dealing with that?
So the champions are a great way for us to find out and connect with more people around the globe. And so I do have someone in Beijing, so he'll feed back information about Asia Pacific. But with South Africa specifically, we've got some great champions there. And so they are very vocal, and they share a lot of information about what's happening in that market. We also, as a team, travel quite a lot. I was in South Africa, I think, for 2 weeks about a month and a half ago. And what was interesting to me is they're very digital. A lot of people, a high percentage of people have phones, but the issue that they're facing is offline. And so even though they will have internet connection, it will drop on instances. So what they're looking at is a way to ensure whatever new development they build also has an offline capacity. And that's actually quite similar to the experience we find in a lot of schools, that even though they may be wired, even though they have a Wi-Fi access point, it isn't always consistent or reliable or something that they want to use continually. So by building in an offline capability, not only would it benefit emerging markets, but it would also benefit a lot of the ways that people work or collaborate or students learn within a school. So that's an interesting kind of connection between two worlds that people might not have seen as similar.